Elgar Howarth, the renowned British conductor and trumpet player, has passed away. Elgar Howarth was celebrated for his contributions to the world of classical music, particularly his work in the brass and wind music sectors. As well as his deep involvement in contemporary music, he made significant contributions as a conductor, particularly with brass bands, and he was a noted champion of new music. His passing marks the loss of a key figure in the brass band music world, particularly known for his leadership in musical ensembles and his performances of both established and new works. Our guest to talk about his amazing contribution is the Marple maestro Garry Cutt, who worked alongside Elgar at Grimethorpe Colliery Band. So welcome to Smith and Grezzy, Garry. It's been a sad week, but you must have some really treasured memories of working with Elgar Howarth.
I have indeed. Such a long time that we worked together, like 13 years at Grimethorpe. But my very first sort of encounter, if you like, was one of the big band clubs, Dobcross Band Club, when I started conducting with the Middleton Band. Why he was in the audience, I don't know, but that was the first time I met him in 1980. We're going back a bit, aren't we?
We are.
But it wasn't until I went to Grimethorpe in 1991 that we, used to see each other regularly. And that, I suppose when I started the conducting, one of the teachers at Salford was David James, a former resident conductor of Grimethorpe.
Yeah.
Yet another one that didn't last too long, But he did say to me, and I remember the conversation vividly, if you ever get the chance to conduct Grimethorpe, you've got to go. You've got to go. So I'd done 10 years peripatetic teaching, wasn't enjoying that, and got the call from Ken Hurst. So went there in 91.
Wow.
Right.
You were a brave man, Garry.
Yes, I think there was a lot of comments saying you'll be like a lamb to the slaughter with that lot, because it was a tough band room, but I did actually see part of the old band when 19 were employed at the colliery. So it was just a totally different setup. That when the band approached contest, which I have to say, they seemed to be of the same opinion as Garry was, that they didn't like contests and didn't really, appreciate what needs to go into them. But the luxury we had was 2 weeks before, we had every morning rehearsal, Monday to Friday, and the same in the evening.
Yeah.
So my first involvement was on Journey to Freedom. And I can remember the first rehearsal, and I drilled them just up to the first quaver of bar 5. That was without the horn parts, Andy. No triplets, just the quavers. And I spent 45 minutes to get to there.
Okay.
And I think that must have given the sign that, well, it means business. And Frank came along and, of course, took them to Bradford, and they won it. And that's how it all started, really. Yeah.
I'm just trying to think, guys, about the first time. I mean, the last couple of days since he's passed, I just can't get him out of my head. The amount of things that he's done and the influence he's had. I mean, the first time I remember, certainly not meeting him, but being aware of him properly, my first Bellevue as a spectator was in 1974. So I was, 13? And it was James Cook. Next year, it was Fireworks, 75. So Dyke had got banned, or, they won the hat-trick, so they couldn't compete. So, and then the test piece was Fireworks. So I remember vividly going down with my mate, Greg McLaughlin, from Whitburn Junior Band at the time. And I've still got this little miniature score thing, study score. And I was just absolutely gobsmacked by this music. And I know it caused a load of controversy at the time. But from then on, I was sort of hooked. And then you start to sort of research what he'd done, Philip Jones Brass Ensemble. Obviously then, the story of him being a trumpeter initially, or a bander initially, and then a trumpeter, then a composer, conductor, blah, blah, blah. So all this stuff, you start collecting records and, you know, all the LPs and stuff with Philip Jones and everything like that. But there was just something totally different about him straight away, you know. And that test piece, I mean, yeah, the fuss that was created around it, because people just, I don't know whether, I think it's quite a tongue-in-cheek piece. It's quite, there's loads of stuff in it that takes a load of playing, but I think the banders, especially bass players, Simon, they were a bit cheesed off because there's those little scales in it and they all end up in semitones as if the basses are either out of tune or not quite there.
There's actually a note in that piece that many people, many bass sections try and correct. Well, they shouldn't do because he meant it. But
I think some people took umbrage because I think they thought he was taking the mickey out of them a bit or something. But he was always, I mean, everything, when I'm thinking about him and the times that we were together and stuff, there was absolutely no compromise at all from him on anything musically, was there, Garry? He just, he ploughed his own furrow and that was it.
That was it.
That was it. There was no compromise. There was none of this sort of, they don't quite like that, I'll tone it down a bit or I'll do something different or whatever else. It was just his own man, you know. And when you look at, you were on about his contesting thing, Garry, where he didn't really fancy it. And I had a quick look today online about his conducting wins. He's hardly any. As far as I can gather, he's won either 2 or 3 Granada Band of the Years, 72, 73, and it said 77, but I'm not sure because I've got an LP with Bryden Thompson conducted, and I think that might have been one that Bryden Thompson took the band on in 77. But so there's at least got 2 or 3, and a Yorkshire area in 1973. That's it, because he got cheesed off, didn't he?
Yeah.
I remember him saying at one point, he was sick to death of being judged by people who he thought were just nowhere near where he was, musically, and he was right.
Time. Yeah. At that time, though, I think the quality of adjudicators, maybe from outside the world of bands, were coming in, weren't they? And there were names. There were some big names.
Yeah, there were.
I mean, you two, from being a former Black Dyke players, was it Kensington Concerto? Where did Grimethorpe get second with him? 72.
That 72 is Kensington at London. I don't know, without having the thing in front of me, I'm not sure.
Black Dyke won, but Grimethorpe, apparently they got a standing ovation and it was wonderful. Okay. And he had to come back on the stage second.
Right.
I think that's the story about it, yeah.
Right. But I know. Go on,
I was noticing today, Sandy, I looked at his record, and he's obviously not one for building up contest records. And what interested me, he was in the box on Fireworks.
Right.
I would have never had him down as wanting to judge things, but perhaps because it was a new piece, he was asked specifically to do that.
I think
he might have asked him. Yeah.
I heard a really good story. I'm not sure who the other 2 judges were. Maybe you 2 do. But yes, he was in the box, and they must have asked him, "What do you think then? You know, you being the composer." And he says, "Well, any of these 6."
I've heard that as well.
I enjoyed all those.
I can't find my phone. I'm going
now then. Fireworks. Obviously, we alluded the fact that it was a bit controversial.
Yeah.
The sound world was controversial, wasn't it? It was tongue in cheek, but the sounds you were getting from a band were completely different to what had gone before.
Well, he started before then, so we're going back to the early 70s. Granada Band of the Year, so when that was started, repertoire was pretty sort of standard, bog standard. And then he came along with all these W.O. pieces. And he had a mixture of stuff, didn't he? I mean, I'm looking on this LP here, what was the post on? All that King's Hunting Jig, Pavan stuff. You know, the Tudor music that he arranged for brass. So he did it for Philip Jones, and then for band. And he's got a mixture of things: an arrangement of London Derriere, Moonlight Serenade, Introduction Act 3, Lohengrin, Garry. There's one of your pot boilers. And then the little pieces like Pell Mell that were just
Brilliant.
like totally different. And we're talking, this is 50 years ago now, half a century, right? Cops and Robbers.
Oh, I love that
Galliard,
one.
Mal Sims, these are all Elizabethan pieces. March from Divertimento, that's Brian Kelly. Trumpeter's Holiday, Embraceable You, Russian Sailor's Dance, which was Tommy Dodd's arrangement, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Baritone player at Grimy. There's a bit on this record sleeve here. The W. Hogarth Lear is obviously an anagram of his name. And there's a little bit of the spiel on this record sleeve, which is written by Bram Gay. And it's he's on about Mr. Howarth is a serious musician, blah, blah, blah. And then these frivolous little pieces. He says, fortunately, while in America with the RPO, Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, some years ago, Howarth had the great fortune to meet the ornithologist W. Hogarth Lear, a native of the Adirondacks and an enthusiast of the brass band, whose passionate hobby is to compose what both he and Howarth describe as really awful pieces. for band, Mr. Lear's scores were sent for and presented and are included here. In particular, he would wish that you pay attention to Pot Goes the Post Horn, which is scored for 1, 2, 3 or 500 post horns, who are free to begin and cease whenever they wish, in accord with the best trends amongst aleatoric composers. Here I fear is a composer of whom much more may be heard. And that's Bram Gay. I remember as a kid thinking, this guy was real, this W. Hogarth Lear. But he started writing all those tongue-in-cheek things, Mr. Lear's Carnival and all that stuff, you know.
But they were very entertaining, weren't they?
They were just like totally different, right?
Yeah.
Totally different. But I mean, we're talking about a guy there with the contest record of nothing. He's won hardly anything. But yet, you could argue, I think, I don't think there is much argument actually, that he is the most influential person in brass bands in the last half a century, 50, 60 years. And, you know, yeah, he's got no contest record at all. It was way, way, way beyond that about just winning contests, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you've seen all the tributes from players that have influenced them, all them. But from a conductor's point of view, I mean, you talk about his stick technique. It's wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's not just, there's no stupid moves or anything. It's his facial expression sometimes that can just draw something out. He can conduct with his eyes. You know, he can make things happen. I don't know how he does it.
It's very minimal, isn't it?
Minimal.
You know, I did tell that little story about when I was at Grimy, and because of the way the horns sit, we're near the front, and you know, and he was stood there right in front of me, and I can't remember what we were playing. It was something pretty laid back, and his hands are quite close, isn't it? Close to his chest, and just very minimal. But and the band was pretty subdued, and it was going fine, and then he just leaned the top half of his body forward, and the band just went woof and opened up.
Yeah,
and he did nothing. He did nothing at all. Yeah, he had that control and
presence,
respect, presence from the band, you know. Yeah. But he's none of these. I mean, you see it a lot, especially in bands these days. You know, these show pony conductors, we called them, didn't we, Simon? You know? And he wasn't that at all.
No,
he wasn't that. It was just everything was about the music, you know. And you think, okay, you would expect maybe the most influential people to be conductors who've won a lot or whatever else. He's won hardly anything. Yeah. The influence he had on the whole movement is absolutely without equal.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Going back to one of the Granada Man of the Years when they started with Introduction to Act 3.
Yeah.
But he's got the audience before he gets to the stand. Just his presence.
Yeah.
And there's nobody does it like that. The way he walks on.
Yeah.
He's got that presence about it. Like the Major had, I think, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
In a different way, but yeah. Wonderful to watch as a conductor.
Garry, your own conducting technique is quite close to your body and minimalistic. Did you take some inspiration from Elgar?
Yeah, I think you naturally, pick up techniques from other conductors like Roy, James Scott, etc. But it fascinated me with how little he did.
Yeah.
And if I can just, way down the line, again, a friend of yours, the late Derry Jackson, I asked him to come to Grimethorpe to help out for the British Open, and it was Bram Gay's arrangement of Les Prelude.
Yeah, I remember that.
So, starting with the bass notes, and Derek's there with his half-moon glasses. Excuse me, he says, I can't see the beat. And you'll get used to it, Derek, you'll get used to it. And the thing was, approaching that contest, I invited Garry up to the rehearsal. And Jim Scott always had a phrase, like the blue touch paper. Well, he lit the blue touch paper just by being there.
Yeah, I remember that.
So fast. And the band played well. I think we came fourth. Yeah. And Derek says to me, put his arm around me afterwards, he says, I saw the last beat. He says it was about 9 foot tall.
Yeah.
But yeah, he just had that. You wonder, it's the presence and how he could lift a band, make a band play without saying anything,
I've read loads of things this week about how, and they were, especially back in the 70s, they were a rough lot.
Oh, gosh.
But he managed to, harness and control them and then make something of it. And they didn't suffer fools gladly.
No.
But he was totally respected.
Yeah.
Now the one thing that's always stuck me, anybody who's ever been involved with Grimethorpe doesn't call him Elgar, they don't call him Garry, they call him Mr. Howarth.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That says it all for me.
They had the utmost respect for him. He was God, wasn't he? When he was.
Yeah, he was. He was God. Well, I remember, Garry, when I'd come to help the band out on a couple of concerts in Wakefield, I think it was John Hudson. Says, you fancy, and at the time I wasn't doing anything. I was having 6 months off or whatever. And then you phoned me. And we'd always known each other because we did all those scratch band things and all that. And he says, oh, by the way, he says, I've just been chatting with Mr. Howarth, and he wants to come back to the band and do a load of stuff, all these special concerts again and all that. So I thought, right, there we go. I'll have a bit of that. Because it was an opportunity of a lifetime. And we started doing all the proper concerts that he wanted to do.
Yeah.
Again,
And for me, he was always that he would share concerts. So it was an absolute thrill to do a concert with him. And some of the venues that we played and the programmes. Do you remember the Bearings Bank scandal? Was it Nick Leeson?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, yeah.
We played in some magnificent country estate grounds, and he said, Garry, when you get in here, he says, it's dripping with gold. And they've never heard of a brass band.
Yeah.
And the typical humour, he said, I'll give them a bit of a talk and an introduction. So he summoned the principal players and he said, would you just play me a little theme that people know on your particular instrument? So most of them picked operatic melodies. I don't know, were you there, Sandy?
I don't think I was, no.
Oh, well,
no.
He's going to go around the soprano. So Nigel did a bit of Nessun Dorma, Richard did whatever, the euphonium. But the other instrument he was going to feature was Big Bad Bob Archer on baritone.
Oh, God.
But the player that preceded him had pinched the tune that he was going to play. So Bob's scratching his head, and he started playing the cadenza from Ray Woodfield's. What was the
Varied Mood.
Varied Mood. And Howard turned around and he said, "I don't know that one, Robert. Could we have something else?" But that was the humour of the band as well, which he did appreciate. He really did.
Well, that was the one about. I mean, the stories they all used to bat around when I was playing at Grimey as well about the Arbin.
Yes,
it was that one. Was that Bob as well? Go on.
Yes,
tell us that one.
Yes, Robert, do you possess an Arbin tutor book? Very sheepishly, yes, Mr. Howarth. Can I suggest you open it? There was another classic, as you know, Bob's partner in crime on second baritone, Cliff. You know, great bandsman. He never missed a rehearsal. So you know. And one night, Gary's up conducting the band, and Ken Hurst came in. He said, "Gary, Cliff's going to be a little bit late. He had to call the AA out." And even Mr. Howard said, "What, Alcoholics Anonymous?"
Oh dear.
Yeah.
There must have been massive concerts in London, but I remember a story about a certain concert in Buxton, and my lines are a little bit hazy. Can any of you two fill the gaps in?
I was there.
Those can.
Were you?
Were you there? Yeah. So we had one of these concerts with Mr. Howarth in Buxton Opera House. Now, if people don't know Buxton Opera House, typical sort of Victorian building in it, you know, like a theatre, and all these sort of padded cinema type seats that, you know. And the week before, one of the lads had been to Buxton the weekend before, right? So they've been the previous weekend, and they says, this concert in Buxton, you know, he says, outside the Opera House, it's advertised. Grimethorpe Colliery Band, Stars of Brastoff, play popular classics and all this, Danny Boy and everything else, you know. And we were going with Mr. Howarth, and we were playing Michael Tippett, Festal Brass Blues, and all this stuff. Amanda Rucroft, the soprano singer, she was singing some folk songs that he'd arranged and stuff, and an operatic aria, I think, a Verdi thing, and the various other big pieces, you know. And so they said, well, what's the crack? So Terry Webster was the band manager at the time. So Terry phoned the Opera House during the week run up to this. And can I speak to the manager? And I don't know whether he got him initially, but there was basically, the manager admitted that he didn't think he'd get an audience. So he changed the advertising to say that we were playing popular classics and music from Brastoff. So there was a bit of a kerfuffle saying, how are we going to handle this? Then we found out that general manager at Buxton Opera House had decided to take a week's holiday between the Wednesday, running through the weekend that we were there, and coming back the following Wednesday. So he basically just jumped ship and buggered off, you know. And then we had to turn up, Gary, didn't we?
Yeah. He was staying at our house for the weekend.
Right.
He starts talking through the programme to me, and I just looked at him. I says, he says, this should be okay, shouldn't it? So I just said, well, who are you trying to convince? If you think it's okay. But he started getting heckled, didn't he? When it was
we played the first piece, I think, was Festal Brass with Blues, which is a great, fantastic piece.
Oh yeah.
But it finishes a very sort of oddly, it just sort of dissipates into thin air and
finishes unexpectedly, doesn't it?
Yeah, but all the way through this performance, and it's a long piece, I don't know, 13, 14 minutes, maybe more, I don't know. And you could hear these cinema-type seats being, people standing up in the seat going, and then you would see a little light in the corner as the doors opened in darkness and people went out, you see. So this is going on all the time. And we got to the end, and then that was it. There was nothing. And then there was just like a smattering of applause, like, you know, half a dozen people in darkness from what we could see, you know. And then he went to the microphone, didn't he?
Mhm.
And there was just hardly any applause, just stunned silence. and he says, yes, he says, my wife doesn't like that one either. and then this voice from nowhere shouted out, well, why are you playing it then? And he says, well, and there's rubbish, you know. There was all this heckling started, and then he says, well, I'm quite happy to talk about it during the interval, and somebody else shouted, no, let's talk about it now, and then it was just chaos, wasn't it? It was chaos.
Yeah.
And I think Amanda Rucroft came on for the next bit, and she gave the audience a right bollocking, didn't she?
Yeah.
She, do you know who this man is? This band, you know, this is brilliant music, and you know, and it sort of settled down. But then I think that day as well, Terry normally sold CDs, didn't he, at half time, and Terry didn't come either to the concert. I think he sent Peggy Tomlinson,
Right.
who was a trustee of the band, to sell the CDs. So Peggy got all the bloody flack at half time. So that was the Buxton Opera House concert. You know, we were all just sat on stage thinking, what the hell, what's going on? Yeah. You know, but he didn't compromise. He still played the same stuff in the second half. Yeah. You know, the big pieces. So it wasn't really his fault. It was the general manager of the Opera House had changed it.
Yeah.
Had changed the advertising, unknown to the band. It was only pure chance that one of the band lads had gone to Buxton the week before and saw the poster. So,
some of the concerts that he did on the South Bank, the more successful ones, shall we say, they were very well attended, weren't they?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Real music connoisseurs were there, and you know, I remember going years ago. I found myself in London working, and over the weekend I found out that Grimethorpe were on, so I went down the South Bank and had a listen, and it was, let's say, to me at that age, weird music, but I soon got into it because I later went to Desford and we did. He'd written a piece called "Music for Spielberg."
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That was a challenge and a half.
Which, if anybody doesn't know, it's nothing like the music that John Williams has written for Spielberg.
No.
It was proper contemporary, but this is what he thought best encapsulated what the Spielberg films were about. And I mean, this is one of the things that he did right back in, you know, from the 70s, was he enticed all these, I mean, huge names to write for brass band, didn't he?
Yeah.
You know, Harrison Birtwistle, William Walton, Hans Werner Henze, Toru Takamitsu, all these guys.
Birtwistle, he was at college with him, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And
in Manchester.
When he'd written his Grimethorpe aria, Garry was driving him up from London. And he did actually say to Harry, as he referred to him, you know, this band they're a little bit rough and ready, you know. He said, you'll have to sort of earn the respect. And he says, oh, yes, he says, it's my forte, handling people. So they put the parts out for Grimethorpe aria. And they wade through this, and at the end, Howard sat at the back of the band room in the old hut that we rehearsed in.
Yeah.
And Sir Harrison Birtwistle says, OK, gentlemen, anybody any questions? And the then solo horn player said, aye, have you written much more shite like this?
Is that Brian?
Yeah. And Howard was in fits of laughter.
Is that the one where they asked him when he came up, because they went to the institute afterwards, didn't they, for a drink?
Yeah.
And it was that was about his coat, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, that was going on the concert.
Right.
Hey, come on, get ready. And they had this, I don't know, was it a long coat, but it looked really untidy. And somebody said to him, he says, well, this is what I'm wearing. He says, I wouldn't let my dog sleep on that.
Oh dear.
God. But you think that, I mean, the influence at that time he had was big time, wasn't it? He had connections. Yeah. So he got in all these big festivals, regularly, not just one-offs, but regular, and then into the proms as well.
Yeah, yeah.
That was the first time they had bands in the proms, and it was him.
Yeah.
And his reach in all sorts of spheres was huge.
Yeah, the connections he had all over the world, isn't it?
Yeah. We're not talking. Yeah, I remember once we did one in Oldham, and it was a Walton festival because William Walton had originally been born in Oldham, and quickly moved away, I think. But they had that festival there, and by this time, I mean, this was when I was playing with the band, so sort of first 6-7 years of the 2000s, and Mr. Howarth was conducting this concert, and he brought with him Susanna Walton, who was William Walton's widow, and she must have been getting on a bit by then as well. But we used to have a meat pie, meat pie, and you had pie and peas or red cabbage. And I remember them distinctly. We were all sort of milling about at the back after we'd had a bit of a rehearsal. And there was this sort of hot pot pie thing for something to eat before the concert. And he says, Susanna, would you like red cabbage or mushy peas with your pie? And, but that was him, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
He was actually born in Cannock, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And then he moved. Is it to Manchester Eccles?
Eccles, yes, where the play come from.
Yeah.
Right. And obviously, then he went on to. It wasn't the Royal Northern, was it? It was Manchester University.
The old Manchester.
Yeah.
College, Royal Manchester College of Music. Yeah, before it became the Royal Northern. Same institution, I suppose. Yeah, but that's where he had that new music group with Harrison Birkwill, Peter Maxwell Davis, Alexander Gurr, Sandy Gurr, they called them, John Ogden, the pianist, and all that. And they were all about trying to get new performances of new music, And that's where it started. I think apparently he was the last surviving member of that group.
Right.
And then, Simon, you were talking to me yesterday about Mosaic.
Yeah.
Because that contained that.
He wrote when he was 17, I think.
Yeah, I've got this thing. It's on this record here, Sounds of Brass.
It's a great piece.
And it's on here. Where is it? I wrote as a 17-year-old bandsman, perhaps in anticipation of my own prospective parading in the RAF, which I shortly joined as a national serviceman. Yeah. So he wrote that when he was 17. And then I heard an interview today on the radio saying that Peter Maxwell Davis, who was in that music group, had, from his very first composition, which strangely was a trumpet sonatina that he wrote for Mr. Howarth. Mm-hmm. And he said there's a little motif in there which Peter Maxwell Davis subsequently used in a lot of compositions. It was like a little signature thing.
Yeah.
And on this interview on it's on YouTube, Mr. Howarth, it's with Petrock Trelawney on Radio 3 a few years ago.
I've seen it.
And he says, well, I thought if Max can have one, he says, I should have one. And he used that da-da-da-da-da. And he started putting that in all sorts of guises in pieces because it comes up, Gary, in one of your favourite.
Oh, yeah.
In Memoriam Arcade.
Yeah.
Which is an absolutely wonderful piece.
It is. I mean, totally different than a lot of the other pieces that he wrote.
Yeah.
But this was, R.K. Rudolf Kemper, the great German conductor.
Yeah.
Who had such an influence on Garry, played for him many times. And he died rather suddenly. And then within a space of something like 6 months, Garry had written In Memoriam Arcade, starting with that little 5-note motif. And it's all the way through.
So Garry was his first trumpet in the RPO then. Because I remember I've seen a quote. There's been so many brilliant things written on Facebook this week. Someone who said they had again heard an interview with Mr. Howarth saying when he heard that Rudolf Kempfer had passed away, he says, when I heard that news, he says, I cried like a baby. And that's how much he meant to him, you know.
Well, we may go on to it later, but when I left Grimethorpe, I went to Foden's.
Right.
And Garry invited us down to Beccles in Suffolk, where his house. And I put a programme together which featured quite a lot of his arrangements, but Paganini was on, you know, his Spitfire Prelude and Fugue, which of course is in the original key. So I think for something like yourself, it's a host of sharp.
We played that with you at the Proms in the Park in Hyde Park. 53,000 people, didn't we? And it was his arrangement, because there are easier ones.
Yes.
But he kept it in the original key, didn't he?
That's right. So in the interval, he came to chat with me, and the second half was going to start with the Prelude and Fugue. So I said to him, Garry, listen, it's we've been a bit hard up for rehearsal time. Would you mind terribly if we just played the Prelude? And his answer was, well, Willie won't mind, so I guess I don't either. But then we were to follow it with In Memoriam.
Right.
And, it was a big church. There was about 600 in. And Garry was sat on the second row. So the Foden used to play it well, beautiful music, suited me.
Yeah.
We got to the end, very quiet, solemn finish. It was one of those where I just kept the baton there. There was silence.
Yeah.
And then I and turned round, and he was slumped in his chair with tears coming down his face.
Oh. Really?
Obviously, that's how much Kemper meant to him.
Yeah.
And he came up and almost picked me up and hugged me and said, Cutt, you do my piece better than me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if that's not a compliment.
Yeah, exactly.
That is a remarkable piece of music, though, isn't it?
It's beautiful. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And so difficult to play.
Oh.
Yeah. Absolutely
difficult.
Yeah. It is one of those. In this day and age of it's all flash and bluster and BS and stuff, and then you get a piece like that, and unless you can play properly, and unless you're aware of what's going on around you, and unless you've got somebody in the middle who really understands that type of music, it's going to be a car crash.
Yeah.
Going back a bit, the reaction to Fireworks, did that ever put him off? Because it wasn't very charitable, was it?
I don't know. I didn't go to the Open that year. My first Open was 77, I think.
Yeah. I just wondered, when you get a bit of negative press, sometimes it can put you off. But he must have got over any negative press because he was quite prolific.
All the orchestral things that he did, the great thing that he never forgot his roots. Playing in Barton Hall Works Band.
Yeah.
Where his father, Oliver Howarth, conducted, where he was a young lad, and he thoroughly enjoyed coming back to this.
So at the time in the 1980s and 90s, it seems to be from reading his resume online since he's passed away, that was the time when he was all over the world doing operas and first performances of all these weird and wonderful operas and everything. But he never forgot the band stuff. Came back and did all that stuff, and he never compromised. And he would play those pieces with the quiet endings. I've been told by a sort of highly successful, in some ways, band conductor that I can't afford to play quiet pieces that don't end. Pieces that end quietly. I want big applause at the end of everything, so we have to sort of signpost everything and make it a big ending, so we don't really play the quiet-ended pieces. And you think that's just so cheap, And he was never. He would just have total disdain for that, wouldn't he?
Yes, totally.
A colossus of all this stuff. I'm thinking back to his arranging. And one of the big piece that he is probably famous for arranging his pictures at an exhibition, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which he did for Philip Jones.
Yeah.
I mean, at the time, Grimey were playing Baba Yaga and the Great Gate of Kiev and all that, and then they started doing the whole thing. But I was looking up something because it was mentioned here that he had started dabbling with like mosaic and writing little pieces and all this stuff. He played on the Beatles' Magical Mystery Tour. So this book has got dates, who was on the sessions, everything about it. And it says here, Magical Mystery Tour, 1967, recorded the 25th to the 27th of April and on the 3rd of May. And it's got the usual, Lennon, McCartney, Harrison, Starr, and 4 trumpeters. David Mason, now he was the guy that did Penny Lane, played Penny Lane. Elgar Howarth, Roy Copestake, who I think was a early Philip Jones member, and John Wilbraham, again a famous trumpeter. And there's a little bit in here, and it says, in an apparent attempt to keep things spontaneous, McCartney arrived at the studio with only 3 chords and the opening line of the lyric. Evolving the music and rehearsing it as the session progressed, he kept the others' attention by getting them to shout out phrases and bash any percussion instruments to hand. Despite this, they soon lost interest and he had to assume the role of bandmaster, drilling them through a backing track and asking George Martin for traffic sound effects and a trumpet section. 2 further days of erratically inspired labour on the track was followed by a chaotic session for trumpet overdubs, in which McCartney, again, turned up with only vague ideas, leaving Elgar Howarth to dash off a score.
Wow.
So that opening of Magical Mystery Tour, with all the trumpet bits, it seems like Mr. Howarth actually wrote that based on the chord structure that Paul McCartney gave him.
That's a similar story to when McCartney was involved with Black Dyke, I believe. He's got a piano, knocked a few notes out, and there was a copyist there writing. But in this occasion, it must have obviously been Elgar Howarth.
Yeah. But I mean,
incredible.
That's quite amazing.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the fact that he's on Beatles soundtracks as well. It is amazing. But
he's done all sorts, hasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, all the light music stuff. Mr. Lear's Carnival. How much fun was that at the time, and sort of, taking the mickey. I remember a few years ago when he was there at band at Grimey, and I decided, God knows, I was going to do a Christmas piece, and I did. I wrote one called Mr. Lear's Christmas Carnival, with apologies to Mr. Howarth, and the tune was in Dulce Jubilo, da-dun, da-dun, da-da-da-da, but I did it slowly, bum 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 bum, and I basically took his score and I copied the whole layout of it so that there's a horn, it's all the same sort of things all the way through. And I told him, and he just chuckled, But that takes me on to the story about Bonnie Briar Bush.
Oh, wonderful.
Brilliant one. Because at the time when I was playing at Grimey, I was rooting around the library because it's like a treasure trove of all sorts of things. There's manuscripts from all these Harrison Burwhistle and all these guys, And I found in the bottom of a cupboard, Dave Barraclough was the librarian, so I was always there early rooting around, and I found this sheet of manuscript. It was quite a big, sort of A3 size, folded in 4, pencil written, faint pencil. And I thought, it's his handwriting. It's got EH in the corner. And so I found this, and I took it to him one night when I'd found it and said, Mr. Howarth, would you mind if that's all I could find. There was no parts. There was just this sort of short score. And he would write his cornet parts on a couple of staves, and he would write 3 horn parts all in one line, and the baritones and the youths and the trombones all in one line, and the basses and all. Hardly any percussion. I don't, if there is at all in this. And it just looked quite intriguing, this thing. And I says, would you mind if I took this away and put it on the computer? Put it on the computer and then get some parts done. And he says, yes. He says, I vaguely remember doing this. He says, I used to write them all on the train on the way up. He says, so he's coming up to, he probably got off at Sheffield, I would imagine, or Wakefield. And on the way up on the train, he would scribble out all these little pieces. Wow. And he says, I can vaguely remember. He says, if you think it might be any good. And so anyway, I put it on the computer, and it is absolutely astonishing. There are things in that piece I've never heard in anything else. There's a key change in it that is just fantastic. I remember Frosty used to, the key change is led by the bass trombone on this big fruity note. Frosty used to love it, but it's just a gentle little piece, but it's absolutely immaculate. We haven't got anybody writing like that.
No. Another one, Sandy, I listen. I don't know whether it's an arrangement or a composition. Is American Dream.
Oh,
composition, isn't it? Of his.
Is it?
It is. Yeah,
wow.
That was done for, I think, Corey and Grimey went to America in '76.
Yeah, that's
which
right.
was the bicentennial, and he wrote it for that. And I've listened to it this morning. It's
astonishing.
Wonderful. It's wonderful. It's just, and it's hard.
Yeah.
There's loads of effects in there, filigree type things, and little wisps of things coming in and out, and the chords and everything. The scoring is immaculate, and it's just, he's on a different level.
Yeah.
Just a different level altogether. It was just an incredible privilege to do that. And then he wrote me that concerto thing, which again was like, couldn't believe it, and then he signed that the score of it, or the solo part for me and all that sort of thing, but you forget, I just do not think that there is anybody, he must be in the top 4 or 5 most important people in brass banding ever. Never mind the last 50 years, ever.
Yeah, quite right.
So we're including people like Alec Owen, who he obviously revered, all those big Wagner selections that Alec Owen produced way back, 35, 40 minutes long.
Yeah.
Howarth obviously loved those sort of things as well.
Mid-90s?
Yeah.
97, Grimethorpe by some, however, they were going to represent England at the European in London. Right. But they were already booked with Garry for a concert in St John's, Smith Square in London, which was a Thursday evening. They decided they couldn't do both. So out of the blue, Garry phoned me up and he said, explain the situation. He says, so I'd like your little band Marple to come and do the concert.
Right.
And we'll be doing the same programme.
Right.
So it was Montagues and Capulets. Gary's arrangement of the Shostakovich piano concerto.
Yeah, played that with him. Concerto. Yeah.
And then one of these that you're talking about, Sandy, a 40-minute Alec Owen, Tristan and Isolde.
Right.
Well, a little band like
it's
this.
Monstrous.
Monstrous. So we didn't have a soprano at the time, so we got Peter Roberts in.
Right.
And Stephen Lord came and helped on euphonium line.
Right.
So Howarth comes up to Marple we rehearse Friday night, all day Saturday, and then Sunday morning for 3 hours. And you could hear a pin drop, obviously. They were frightened to death.
I bet.
And until Sunday morning, and then Howarth starts explaining about the opera and who was having an affair with whom and what have you. And then Pete Roberts' timing, he just said, bit like Neighbours, really, isn't it, Mr. Howarth? And that broke the ice, so the band relaxed.
Yeah.
And in the afternoon, I brought all the band back for a barbecue in the garden,
Right.
And he said to me, he says, are there the local band clubs around here? Is there a brass band on? I said, yeah, there'll be one on at Glossop Band. Yeah, can we go? I said, yeah, of course. So I got Scott Shelton, who had the best car. He had an E-Class Mercedes, so
Right.
he drove us up. And there was a fourth section band on, and the conductor, I think he'd announced the piece, so that we went in there and we walked right round the bar to the other end. And you could see the players in the band must have been telling the conductor who's come in, i.e. Elgar Howarth. Anyway, they then proceeded to play Hogarth's Hoedown.
Oh,
And they get to the end of it, and the conductor turns around and he says, hello, in a really broad, hello, Mr. Howarth. Would you like to hear that again? And it was like a tennis court where all the complete silence, they looked over him. And again, the timing, and he just said, no, not really.
Oh, God.
The concert that we did in Beccles at the end of it, he says, I'm sure we've got time for a pint before the coach goes. I said, yes, yeah. So we went down to the pub and he's chatting away to the players. And then he said, Leslie Howie on solo horn.
Yeah.
I've got some carrier bags of stuff for Garry. He says, can you just nip up to the house? And she had to make 2 trips up to his house, just up the road, put these. I got them home, and all his brass band scores.
wow.
That he had in his library.
Right.
So in actual fact, at 12 Shire Way, there is a plaque over one room that says the Howarth Suite. That's very easy to say. And then the other one is library. The gems that were in this original Alec Owen scores.
Jeez.
Rimmer, penned. Yeah.
Wow.
But on top of that, I noticed like half a dozen folders. And I started to go through these. And it's literally tens and tens of personal letters, either from his family when he went in the RAF,
Right.
or letters from William Walton.
Gee.
Wow.
Wilfred Heaton at the time that he was composing contest music.
Wow.
Right.
I've got 6 folders of these, very personal letters, as well as all of his scores.
Wow.
That's
Wonderful.
amazing.
Yeah,
That's amazing. I mean, how do we sum him up, guys? How do we sum up his
there's nobody like him.
contribution? His contribution.
I don't think he's been matched.
I don't think he
No.
ever will be.
No chance.
He's, to me, I mean, I haven't had, you probably tell from this podcast, too much to do with Mr. Howarth, apart from I recorded one CD with him. But looking from afar, he was just astonishing.
He always had. He was a genuinely nice bloke who had time to talk and advise anybody. Always made time.
Yeah.
He's just wonderful person.
Yeah.
And what a brain! What a brain! He must
Oh
have.
God. Yeah.
Composer, arranger, author, conductor, you name it.
He's a proper. I mean, they talk about polymaths and these people that Leonard Bernstein is always the cited example. He is like that for us, for the band movement.
Mm-hmm.
He is our Leonard Bernstein, isn't he?
Yeah.
He was talented in so many ways and so influential.
Yes.
It's
Like you
not
said,
about contest wins or anything else.
No.
It's about persuading the real big hitters and operating on the same platform as the William Waltons of the world and the Harrison Birtwhistles and the Toru Takamitsus and the Hans Werner Henses and all Malcolm Arnold, all these people. They were friends.
Yes.
Colleagues.
Yeah.
And he still had time to do everything he did for brass bands.
Yeah. I mean,
Remarkable.
Going back to the Marple thing, I'd been asked to adjudicate with Peter Parks at the Grand Shield, and Marple had a concert in Upper Mill Civic Hall.
Right.
And I'd committed to do this, but I rang him up and I said, can you come and do the first half of the concert? And he said, yes, of course I can. And he actually then also, which has been rather special to me, that I'd been at Marple for 15 years, and he came to a rehearsal and he'd written a piece for me. Chris.
Oh, wow.
God. Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I mean, we all knew this day was coming because he's been
ill until the last couple of years.
He's been in ill health and all that, but still, when it comes and you just, but then you start to appreciate it with such a long, fruitful life, and that if you've been a tiny, tiny part of it, just being able to soak up his inspiration and do a few things, it's just brilliant. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, guys. So it's a sad time for everybody, but it's been lovely to reminisce.
It's good to reminisce about him.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank you, Garry, very much for coming on and giving us some of your rather personal stories. It was remarkable.
Thanks, mate.
And thanks, Sandy, for some of your memories. So from Smith and Gressy, many thanks for joining us.